Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you everybody for joining us for this session where we will be having a look at the Greater Manchester devolution deal. Many of you will have seen headlines about devolution deals in Greater Manchester and other parts of the country, but what do they actually mean in practice? How are they impacting on the lives of residents, on businesses? How are they changing things? And particularly for us at Tech UK, how are they impacting on digital and the technology sector, and making sure that the UK is as competitive as it possibly can be, that we're supporting businesses, and that we're also delivering on being a science and tech superpower, something that we know matters to Tech UK members and stakeholders as well. We've got a brilliant panel today who will be speaking a little bit more about the devolution deal, including colleagues from Midas, Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and from Microsoft. But first, I'm really keen to bring in Joe Manning, who is the Chief Exec at Midas, to say a little bit more about Midas and the devolution deal and why that matters to them. Joe, can I bring you in?
Thanks, Matt, and good morning, everybody. So I'm Joe Manning. I'm Managing Director at an organisation called Midas, and we are Greater Manchester's inward investment agency. So Midas operates between our Mayor's office through the Combined Authority, our 10 local authorities, and then our private sector partners as well. And our role really is to encourage investment from across the world and across the UK, and to promote Greater Manchester as a great place to do business. Over recent years, we've been putting a lot of emphasis on the growing tech and digital economy in Manchester, which is a huge success story for us at the moment. One of the fastest growing tech cities outside London, and a real potential, as I think you've already touched on, to be at the heart of the science superpower vision for the UK. We have a number of specialisms within that, and colleagues may touch on those as we go through the day in terms of things like cyber and fintech as well. And I think what's interesting is this stage of the devolution deal allows us to start to realise some of those ambitions, and that's what I will touch on. But before jumping into that, the other thing I just wanted to say is we're very much in listening mode as well. We want to hear from colleagues on this call how the devolution deal can work for business and how we can work in partnership. And we're still at a relatively early stage. The deal was only agreed a couple of months ago. We are working through some of the parameters of what it could mean. So yes, we're here to talk to you about what we think is in the deal and why that's something to be excited about, but we'd also love to hear people's views as well, and how we can continue the engagement after today's call. So firstly, what is a devolution deal? I think is the question I've been given. And on the face of it, it's a relatively dry answer in that it's a policy document. It's an agreement between the Mayor of Greater Manchester and the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, the 10 local authorities that make up Greater Manchester, and the government. And it's an agreement on a number of different policy areas for the powers to be passed to Greater Manchester to have, I guess, further control over its future. And really, it's an ability to embed that collaboration in that policy document. I think there's several hundred commitments in a full deal, and I don't expect anyone to have read it from start to finish. But what I'd like to do is just highlight a few of the areas that I think are really interesting and key for both business and for growing the Greater Manchester tech economy. And then I'll allow colleagues to jump in and talk to that in more detail. So the first really for me is the skills agenda. Some of you may have noticed an announcement last week from Mayor Andy Burnham talking about the Manchester Baccalaureate. And what we've got through the devolution deal is an ability to start to set post-16 technical education in a way that works for the needs of the Greater Manchester economy. And I think for me, that is one of the most powerful elements that has come out of the deal. And I know Marie will talk in more detail about what that could mean and what Microsoft have been doing. But the first thing to highlight is skills. Any conversation we have with investors into Greater Manchester begins with skills. Have you got the talent? Can my business recruit? Have you got the pipeline of talent, whether it be looking at school age education all the way through to PhDs? And Greater Manchester does have that talent base. It has a really strong story to tell around the universities and around upskilling that's going on at the minute in the digital economy. But now we have another part of that puzzle through our emphasis on technical education and post-16 as well. So skills is hugely important. I think the second area is transport. This has been an element of the Manchester devolution journey over a number of years now. I'm creating an integrated transport system, a London-style transport system where you can move between buses and the tram network is hugely important for connecting people to the jobs and allowing people to get around the city. The devolution deal allows us to take a next stage on that, where we can think about some of the rail networks as well. So that's a huge step forward for Greater Manchester in terms of creating that 21st century connected city region. And it also then speaks to what we want to do in terms of the active travel agenda as well, in terms of cycling and walking and creating that full integrated system. And again, from both a business investment perspective and a quality of life for residents, getting the transport right, we know is absolutely crucial. And the Mayor's team will be setting out further announcements on that in the coming weeks as well. And then the final area we're looking at as well is housing as a key priority. So again, a question often asked from investors is ultimately, if you're new to the country, if you're new to the city, are you going to have a quality of housing stock and a quality of life proposition? And Greater Manchester is now got increased powers to be able to invest in that, and also to build that cultural offer around the quality housing as well. So I think there are three areas I'd draw out as being really crucial elements of the devolution commitment. It's also worth saying that this isn't a new game for Manchester. I think we're on to our 7th or 8th agreement with government, but we do think this is one that really starts to shift the dial. There's been a number of iterative agreements over recent years, but this is the one that we're really quite excited about, the powers that are being passed to GM. And I think I'd just outline a couple of other areas for why that's the case. So the first is, within the devolution deal, there's a commitment to negotiate a single funding settlement with government. Now, that sounds quite technocratic, but in simple terms, it starts to shift Greater Manchester to something more akin to the arrangements in Wales and Scotland, where rather than competing over a lot of different budget lines, we're able to set a 3-year spending priorities and start to think to the medium and long term. Colleagues working to support the Mayor and Combined Authority, I think at the moment they're responsible for about 140 different funding streams. So you can imagine the headache that creates when you've got these different buckets of money for different policy areas. Whereas if you can start to shift to that single settlement, it allows you to be much more strategic as a city region, and it will allow us to sit down with colleagues and talk about a medium-term plan about where the city is going in terms of its economy and its social policy as well. And the other part of that is the investment zones and growth zones, which were announced in the devolution deal as well. And they start to give us the ability to look out, in some cases, over a 20-year period, over where we think the future growth will be happening within the city, both in terms of sectors as well as locations. And I think there's huge opportunities in Greater Manchester at the minute for that future growth. And those growth zones start to give us a bit of a toolkit that allow us to make some investment decisions to really kind of help those businesses grow. So I'd outline those two as kind of really important elements of the devolution deal as well. And then just a final thing before I hand over to Marie that I just wanted to highlight. So I'm relatively new in post, I think about 3 months now, and it was really striking when the devolution deal was agreed. We were actually on a trip to the US supporting the Mayor's office, and as part of that, we were talking to a number of US tech firms saying, come and invest in the UK, come and invest in Manchester. And that devolution deal almost immediately gave us something new to offer. And it was really striking the kind of, I guess, the technical and policy language. We tried to shift quite quickly into that business-friendly language, in that if you can say to an investor in the US that you can do more for skills, that you can create a great place, and that you're a city region that has more of those ability to do that and wants to work in partnership and wants to work for the long term, that becomes quite a powerful conversation. And so with my colleagues as well, we're thinking at the moment as Midas, how do we really leverage that? How do we go out into the US market and into other markets to talk about devolution in a way that really helps us generate that foreign investment and help grow the tech cluster in Manchester? So on that note, I will hand over to Marie, and I'm happy to take any questions, in the course of the session.
Thanks, Joe. Before I bring Marie in, I just want to say that if those listening have got any questions, please put it in the Q&A function that's there. I'll be keeping an eye on that to make sure that I can put questions to our different panelists as well. And Joe, thank you very much for that. I think it's great that you were in the States as the Devo deal was signed and getting real-time questions about what it means. I think that's brilliant, but also shows the power of a devolution deal. Marie, I'd like to bring you in, and could you just say a little bit about your role and what Microsoft has been doing in this space working with GMCA?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Matt. So my name is Marie Hamilton, and I lead the strategy for Microsoft across the Greater Manchester region. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about a recent partnership that we've developed with GMCA and what that means and what it's bringing to the Greater Manchester region. But I think actually Joe Munnelly is going to talk a little bit about the digital policy and how the devolution came about first.
Absolutely. Joe, let's bring you in. Sorry, I should say Joanna Manelli, who's head of digital policy at GMCA. You're filling in for Phil, who unfortunately can't be with us today. He's unwell. We wish him well and hope he gets well soon. But you've been intimately involved in this devolution deal as well, and what actually it means for business. So I just wonder if you can say a little bit more about that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And as I say, apologies from Phil, who would have loved to be here, but unfortunately is unwell. I think really, Joe gave a great introduction to the breadth of the deal. I think it's really important to recognise, though, that although it was levelling up a white paper in the government that announced this round of Trailblazer devolution, as Joe said, we've been at devolution now since 2009. This is our 7th deal. You're right, Joe, the most far-reaching, over 236 policy commitments. So a really dense document. But I think what it's really important to say is it isn't a piece of national policy. It is actually a lever to deliver our local policy. So the Levelling Up white paper was the policy document that set out that commitment from government to deeper devolution and identified Greater Manchester as the place that would trailblaze deeper devolution because of our track record. Well, what's particularly interesting is the alignment between those Levelling Up missions, those 12 government Levelling Up missions, and our own Greater Manchester strategy ambition. So just 12 months before the Levelling Up white paper, we had announced in Greater Manchester our new Greater Manchester strategy under the banner of Good Lives for All, with that clear commitment to make Greater Manchester a great place to grow up, get on, grow old, a place to invest, do business, visit and study. And I think what I want to keep at the heart of our thinking when we talk about Devo is it is a way to deliver on our own local policy priorities of levelling up and levelling out so that all areas of Greater Manchester are able to benefit from those opportunities. It really is at the heart of everything we do that prosperity must benefit all parts of our city region, and it also must be done in a really sustainable way for our environment and for our people. I think the other point around the devolution deal is there are a whole range of processes that we do need to go through now. We may have signed the deal in March, but enacting the deal will take time. As I've said, over 200 commitments. Some of those will come into effect post-spending review next year, which will actually be potentially when we have a new government in post. So, we have to bear in mind that these devolution opportunities aren't going to be realised overnight, and we will need to work through and prioritise them. They'll need to be subject to public consultation, and we do want to work with partners, as Joe said, to ensure that as we are enacting them, we're doing that in a way that works for everyone in the city region who is a key stakeholder in this. As we particularly outline, the single settlement is the first of its kind in a Devo deal, and it is probably the most exciting because it does give us that funding flexibility once we get it over the line, not just to bring funding streams together into a single pot with longer term financial certainty, but also a single accountability framework. So it will be really clear how we're performing in Greater Manchester and how we're delivering against our commitments. And we won't be reporting lots of different outcomes to lots of different government departments, and it will bring a completely different level of scrutiny to the Greater Manchester area, which is both exciting, but from a combined authority point of view, also incredibly daunting, as you can imagine. As Joe said, there are kind of 3 really big areas within the Devo deal other than the single settlement. Transport, housing and skills are the 3 that we absolutely would point to. But I think what we're trying to effect here is a real policy shift, a policy change, a move from focusing on housing supply to housing affordability and housing standards, a shift from skills for higher education to skills for technical education, and so that there are 2 equal paths. And anyone who heard the Mayor's announcement last week will have understood his really bold ambition to have a further education pathway, a technical education pathway that is equal to the higher education pathway, so that people in Greater Manchester do have choice of how they pursue their education post-16. And with the funding and the flexibilities that we have, we'll be able to pursue that with government and hopefully trailblaze a different way to think about post-16 education. And as we mentioned, transport, any of you who are in the Greater Manchester region will start to see those yellow buses moving around the city soon. And that really is a move towards not just the regulation of buses, but the future integration of rail, but also a much fairer fare structure. And there will, as was said, be further announcements in the coming weeks as to how that will play out. Because at the moment we're in a situation where we do have a really great talent pool. We've got 5 universities, 10 FE colleges, but a shocking statistic that approximately 40% of our graduates can't get to their places of employment in a reasonable commuting time because of transport. So I hope we'll see how all of the opportunities we want to bring forward under Devo do come back to our commitments, kind of fairer and more prosperous city region. I think the other thing that I also want to put in context is, as I say, Devo will take time to enact, but just last week, as a Greater Manchester Combined Authority, we refreshed and launched our refreshed GM Digital Blueprint, and that is really a collaborative blueprint. It's something we've developed through extensive consultation with partners across academia, industry and the public sector. And it is the vehicle through which we do want to collaborate with everyone in the city region on delivering our ambition to be a world-leading digital city region, and really recognise that if we're going to fulfil that ambition, we can't leave anyone behind. We want to ensure that we are able to empower all communities to benefit from the opportunities of digital, and really ensure that all businesses can become resilient and prosperous through digital. So I would really encourage people in understanding the Devo deal and the opportunities it brings to reflect on our own kind of local policy through both the GMS and the refreshed GM Digital Blueprint.
Joanna, thank you so much for that. I've got questions of my own that I'm keen to ask, because I think this is really exciting, and that it's another Devo deal just shows the passion from Greater Manchester to take control of their own destiny as well, and their own destiny for what can deliver for businesses and for residents across the city and the city region too. Marie, it feels a great opportunity to bring you in at this point.
Great, thanks Matt, thanks Joe for framing that. I think I'm going to talk about it from a business perspective, and also where we are around skills, the work that we're doing from a tech community perspective to try and make sure that we fill our talent pipeline. As Joe says, it's really exciting times within Greater Manchester. We are the fastest growing tech hub in Europe, which is fantastic. That does bring us some challenges on the skilling side of things, but I think it's really important to say up front that there is no shortage of talent within Greater Manchester. You know, we've got great universities, we've got great FE colleges, and I think one of the things that the Devo deal will bring in is that opportunity for us to reach more people and show pathways to really good jobs. We have a really strong digital ecosystem. So Joe was talking earlier about some of the investments that have been made in the region. I think, Joe, you mentioned Aton Valley, which is one of the new investment zones. I've just recently been in a business breakfast, in fact, just prior to this meeting, where the mayor was talking about the level of investment that's coming into region and what that means for our businesses. But we do need to reach more people within our community and show them and make sure that that is equitable growth. So if I talk about where Microsoft are within region, so we currently have an office in UA 92, which kind of describes itself as a startup university, which is very much about helping people into university that wouldn't normally go to university or might take a slightly different route. And we're based in there, and we have 3 strands to our strategy. So it's very much about bringing the Microsoft mission to life within Greater Manchester, empowering Greater Manchester to achieve more. We do that through supporting inclusive economic growth. So how can we work with our startup community, with our business community, and make sure that we bring our skills agenda, but also some of the other things that we have to offer from a Microsoft perspective. How do we look at public service transformation? So that's the digital transformation piece that you would normally think of from a Microsoft perspective. And then how do we try and help that drive to net zero, which, as you will have heard, is really, really important from Greater Manchester's perspective. We have quite stringent targets that we're trying to reach. So a desire to get to net zero by 2038, which is slightly ahead of other regions. If I look at that, the thing that cuts all the way across it is skills. So we need people to help us grow our economy, and that needs to be inclusive. It can't just be about the people that are in the centre of Manchester, or those 36% that would normally follow the traditional route. We need to make that growth about all of our people. So we need to show them pathways and routes to good jobs. Public services is about digital transformation. Again, if we're going to deliver digital transformation, and I think everybody would recognise that that's needed currently within our public services, then we need to have people who are in a position to be able to do that. And similarly, that drive to net zero, we need to be able to measure where we are now, look at where we're going, and look at what interventions will make a real difference. So people may be aware that Microsoft have a skilling program which is nationwide at the moment. So we're looking to reskill or upskill 1.5 million people across the UK over a 3-year period. I think we're about 18 months into that, and we're already doing very well. So we're well on target to be able to help support that. And what we wanted to do within Greater Manchester is bring that skilling program into region, but rather than just coming in as Microsoft to deliver that, we want to work with the booming tech sector and the digital ecosystem that we've got here. So you'll hear about Get On Greater Manchester, which is a programme we're running in partnership with GMCA, but it is very much a collaboration. So it's a partnership. It's how do we work together to show people, our young people, our career changers and citizens within Greater Manchester, the great opportunities that there are available within our tech sector, and then help show them pathways to get there. So that runs across 3 strands. So we're looking at how do we raise aspiration? And actually, to be honest with you, there's not a lack of aspiration within Greater Manchester at the moment. But what we need to show people is where to direct that aspiration, where the opportunities are. So I think some of the announcements that the Mayor made recently about the Manchester Baccalaureate and those opportunities for young people to study computer science, to study engineering, and also some of the creative subjects at age 14 that then feeds into the pathway that may go through university, but may actually take a different route. But as long as the end of it is some high quality employment where they can contribute to our booming industry, but also similarly, they can have good jobs and good careers. So as part of that, we're doing an awful lot of outreach at the moment. So we're bringing our skills program in. We're working with organisations that exist within Greater Manchester, such as Host over in Salford, who are doing some great things around cyber and encouraging young people to consider careers in cyber. So you may or may not know, so within Greater Manchester, cyber is a key focus for us. So we've got GCHQ moved into the region. So there's really high demand. And I think when you look at the Northwest Corridor, which has got that big cyber focus, we need to bring people through, but that needs to be diverse as well. So we need to have not just the people that we would get anyway, but we need to reach out to women, to diverse communities, and make sure that basically the people who are moving to that industry really reflect that vibrant community that we have within Greater Manchester. So Host are doing some work with Cyber Girls First to look at how we can encourage girls into cyber. We're also looking at where we can work not just with our young people, but with our tech changers as well, to bring things from Microsoft Learn in our Skills program to help support that community and show them where the opportunities lie within our tech sector. So very, very much about creating belief and creating aspiration. We also have a work stream which is looking very much at employee engagement. So how can we work with the big employers within the region to try and address the skills gap that we've got at the moment and really drive change? So we've pulled together a group of organisations which we've termed the Northwest Tech Talent Group. And you'll recognise some of the big names that are actually working in there. So you've got GCHQ, ITV, PwC, who are actually responsible for pulling that group together, Talk, and then some of our SMEs as well, such as A&S and Cloudco, looking at how collectively we can reach more people and look to try and bring people both into our organisations, but actually grow that talent pipeline for the region overall, so that it's consistently coming through. So it's about how do we work together, and we've done that really, really successfully. So we've already reached hundreds, if not thousands, of people over the period that we've been working together in 12-month period. But we're also mobilising our partner network as well. So from a Microsoft perspective, obviously we have a very large partner network, and we're using them, talking to them about what they can do to make a difference within the region from a skillings perspective. So we're delivering things like workplace safaris, which sound very scary, but are actually, they're like an alternative to work experience. So if you think about the traditional work experience where you bring young people into your business and they kind of follow people around, don't really know what they're doing, and the businesses typically don't actually know what to do with them either. What workplace safaris enable us to do is actually reach more people, bring them to our businesses as a group, and actually run activities for them so that they get a real feel for what the business looks like and what the opportunities are within that. So we've got several partners that are running them at the moment, and they've been very, very, very successful at reaching some of the young people. The other thing that we're doing is looking at the Enterprise Advisor Scheme. And I guess this is one of the areas that GMCA and the fact that the devolved authority actually exists that really helps us. So what we want to do as a tech community is reach out into lots of our schools and lots of our educational establishments. If we were to try and do that individually, it would be very, very difficult. But because we can collaborate with GMCA and we can work with GMAX, which is the skills organisation within GMCA, they can almost act as an instigator for us. So they can direct us to the schools where the most need is, and we can pull them together and make sure that we are targeting a wide range of society. Talked about the employee side of things, but actually one of the things that Greater Manchester is really famous for is its great universities. And as you can imagine, we're also doing an awful lot of work with the university community. So I mentioned Salford University earlier, and actually Salford University for us is a real trailblazer, as is UA92 actually, on the things that they're doing. So we did some research a while ago with LinkedIn to look at, you know, where graduates were not getting jobs, why they weren't getting jobs. And what we found is that graduates who actually had a digital certification were actually 2.6 times more likely to land their first job, which actually, when you look at that from a statistical point of view, is huge. And so what we're doing is we're looking at how can we embed some of these digital certificates within curriculums in the universities. So if you look at Salford University, for example, most of their students, when they actually leave university, they won't just leave with a degree, they will actually leave with that digital certification, which will show to employers that they've got those skills, they've got that aptitude, and they've done something which goes a little bit above and beyond some of their peers potentially. And we're also doing similar things with UA92 and in discussions at the moment with the University of Manchester. So I would see that ultimately kind of going out across the universities. But one of the other major announcements that there was in Greater Manchester recently was the Institute of Technology. So it was a really busy day last Wednesday. So in the morning, the Mayor announced the Manchester Baccalaureate and everything that means, with the 2 equal pathways for young people to either go down the university route or take a more technical direction. And then in the evening, the Institute of Technology actually launched. And the Institute of Technology, rather than being a specific place, it's actually almost like a concept where you have, and there is a place as well actually, but it's a concept of organizations coming together, collaborating, which is something that we're really good at, in order to provide directions for young people into technical careers. So feeding back to that technical education pathways, which brings in our sixth form colleges as well, and our colleges from a regional perspective. I guess finally, while we're talking pathways, we can't ignore apprenticeships. So apprenticeships is one of the other areas that we've been working very closely with Greater Manchester Combined Authority on. Again, how do we find those pathways for our young people into good roles, into industry? And we are looking at bringing our apprenticeship connector into the region to look at how we can connect the people who are delivering apprenticeships, the young people and the employers that are looking to bring those apprentices into their organisations. How can we bring them together so that it's a clear and obvious pathway for them. But as I say, the main thing, and the one thing I would say when I look at the Greater Manchester economy and where we are and where skills is, this is very, very much about collaboration. It's about lots of organisations coming together, working together and making devolution a success, and making it so that we have the skills that we need in order to feed the economy. I could talk about the transport network as well, I think, which is a massive benefit to devolution, and some of the plans that the Mayor's got there around having that integrated transport system where you will have buses and trains working together on a single tap in, tap out solution as you have in London at the moment. But I'll probably stop there, Matt, to be honest with you, and hand back to you.
Marie, thank you so much. And two words kept coming out in everything that you, Joanna and Joe have said, which is people and collaboration. It does feel very much like this is a process done with and not done to, which is very different, I think, from perhaps where devolution deals originally started from, and what they meant and how they interacted with communities on this. So on that, I'm going to open one of the polls that we've got, which is a good opportunity for people to get in touch and say a little bit more about how they want to interact with Midas, if they want to know a little bit more about the Devo deal and how they want to get in touch on this so we can share further information with people. The question and answer chat is open now, but I'm using my chair's prerogative to ask some questions to begin with, if that's okay. And one of those is to Joanna straight away. Joanna, you talked a little bit there about that reporting and scrutiny change that's coming through. I think people often would say, well, how's that going to interact with local authorities that are in that area as well, and what the combined authority does, and how is the Devo deal going to impact that relationship?
I think that's a really interesting one, because actually I think our relationship with our local authority, the Greater Manchester, is fairly unique, and actually the more interesting conversational dimension is how it's going to impact our relationship with local politics. So if I just explain to those of you who don't know the inner workings of the CA, in Greater Manchester, the combined authority is the Mayor with the 10 leaders. So unlike Greater London, where the Mayor is completely separate from the 30 plus local authorities, our combined authority governance means that in theory the 10 local leaders could outvote the Mayor. So there are 12 votes in any decision made by the CA, the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, Police and Crime Commissioner, and the 10 leaders. So actually we are incredibly accountable to our local areas in a way that London isn't. What will be different under the single settlement is the role that MPs will play. So actually under the current framework, the Mayor is accountable to the local authorities. In the future single settlement, he will be accountable to potentially select committees in the same way an MP would be. So that's the dimension of change, and actually how we then work in a locality where, as you may all be familiar with localities, where a council may be one colour and a local MP may be another colour. So I think that is the interesting opportunity for us to understand how we bring MPs closer to regional politics, and how we work through what will be, I think, a much more complex landscape, but ultimately will help get the views of all sides of the political spectrum heard. And we will need to take account of that when we're kind of designing how we report what we're doing, how we capture what we're doing, and how we ensure that everybody has their say.
I think that's a really great point about MPs being engaged as well, because I think MPs can often see their role at a national level, and yet they're representing constituents at a very local level. Now, your role in terms of digital policy means that actually there's some more powerful conversations, I suppose, that are enabled through the Devo deal. Does that provide you some new opportunities?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think what's interesting, I mean, we've touched on the four big pillars really of the deal, the things where finances have been devolved, but actually there are some interesting smaller pieces in the deal. And I say smaller, not because they're less important, just because there wasn't necessarily the right time or the right budget to go after. You mentioned, how collaboration is kind of baked into Greater Manchester. It's baked into how we work in Greater Manchester, but how we work with government also. I think off the top of my head, there are 6 strategic partnerships with government in the Devo deal: a strategic innovation partnership, a strategic productivity partnership, strategic data partnership, a cultural partnership, and the one that I'm getting to in response to your question is our digital infrastructure leadership group that we have proposed with government. So when we looked at digital, there was actually very little in terms of powers or finances that we thought were better at this point in time controlled by us in the city region. But that wasn't to say that we didn't want to influence the way government were thinking. So our digital ask was for a changed relationship for what was then DCMS and what is now DSA in terms of how they invest in digital infrastructure in a locality. Their approach from a historical point of view has been very much a kind of numbers game, total properties passed, getting the fibre in the ground. We wanted to really shift that onto a purpose-driven, how is it enabling productivity, how is it being taken up, adopted, used, and changing the way that we act in the city region. So our opportunity really through Devo is in the deal commitment from DSIT to work with us on digital infrastructure leadership, so that we can hopefully shape that kind of infrastructure investment in a way that really adds value and doesn't just connect properties to sort of tick that first box, as it were.
I think that take-up commitment is a really great one as well, not just the properties pass that's coming in there, and something that definitely speaks to a number of residents and comments that I've seen when I speak with a number of command authorities and local authorities too. So that's a great new initiative. Joe, I want to come to you on a next question as well, if I may, and that's about devolution deals themselves and what that means for inward investment. Because as you've said, this is the 7th Devo deal that's been coming through for Greater Manchester. I think the first one's felt a little bit like those cartoon sketches of Tom and Jerry, where the track was being laid in front of Tom as the train was going along. This Devo deal feels incredibly different. It feels like actually there's a strategy set out, this idea of a single settlement, what it can do and what it can deliver. What can that deliver for inward investment and companies, not just based in Greater Manchester, but those who want to come to Greater Manchester as well?
Thanks, Matt. Funnily enough, I used to work in government a few years ago before taking this role, and actually sat on the other side of some of the devolution deals. So I'm sat here wondering whether I was Tom or Jerry in your in your metaphor there. You know, I think it's a point for me about where you start to get to is a bit more long term, and for me, I genuinely think in terms of when we're talking about the future of both economic growth, but particularly the tech economy, cities is where the action's at, right? So when we're thinking about our international relationships, our international competitors and other international clusters, we're looking globally at other cities, whether that be our recent trip to Austin in the US or Bangalore when we're in India, or we're going out to Japan later this year. We're not looking at a nation level, we're looking at a city level, and we're saying where are those fast growing tech clusters, and what, how do we get GM at the international table? The deal, I think, gives us more of a toolkit to do that, because internationally a lot of cities have had more say over their own destiny over quite a long time. The UK is quite uniquely centralised in the way that decisions are made, and what Greater Manchester now is successfully doing is pulling more of those levers and decision making down to the city region level, and it allows me and the team to be able to sit down with investors and say, if you want to make an investment into Greater Manchester, this is where we think we're going over medium and long term, whether that be around the skills agenda that Marie's really well articulated, whether it be around infrastructure, whether it be around further investment support. And I think that's why it's quite, I referred to this of the 7 or 8 deals as potentially the game changer. Now, as Joanna's just set out, we maybe didn't get everything we wanted in this deal, so devolution continues to be a journey, and we will continue to make the case for further powers and funding to come to Greater Manchester. But I do think there's been a shift here in that ability to say, we as a city are able to set out a medium to long-term plan where we're more in charge of our own destiny. I think the other bit, just in the detail, is worth saying. There is a commitment in the deal for us to work more closely with the Department for Business and Trade. So we are having conversations with colleagues in government about that at the moment. Interestingly, government is also reviewing its approach to FDI as well. And so what we're trying to say is, if you buy the cities are where the action's at, work with us so we have a more joined up national and local partnership when we're in market, when we're targeting key companies, and those companies can have that kind of really good landing in both the UK and Greater Manchester, and we can better share our sector and market intelligence, and that we can start to plan not just for the next year, but for those companies we'd like to land in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So it's not one of the headline grabbing initiatives in the deal, but that greater partnership with colleagues in the Department for Business and Trade, working together on information sharing, and that's a more strategic forward-looking approach is also quite an important element of it.
Thanks, Joe. And I know when we published our digital index last year, one of the recommendations was around closer working with mayors and combined authorities on that trade element. There's such an important and powerful voice that mayors and combined authorities have. They know their regions, and they can go out and market their regions in a way that perhaps government can't, or maybe government necessarily shouldn't always do that. I think there's a great opportunity. And there's also a great question in the chat here coming from Alex, and I'm going to turn to Marie for this. So Microsoft has asked partners to help. What areas do Greater Manchester and universities need support from the tech sector from your perspective? Is it around smart cities? Is it around cyber? Where's that journey going?
Yeah, I think all of the above, to be honest with you. So if I look at where we, as I say, you know, from a strategy point of view, we've talked a lot about skills, and that's probably one of the first things that the tech sector can do to help. So how do we raise aspiration? We talked about the workforce to Paris, so we're always looking for more customers, more partners to get involved in them, so that we can bring young people into our organisations and show them the pathways and the routes to good employment. I think, though, looking at our startup community as well, where can some of the bigger businesses work with our startup community to try and help them as they sort of find their way? But if we look at the digital transformation side of things, clearly from our business partners and the organisations that we work with, there is a huge opportunity there for us to work more collaboratively and try and drive the change that's needed to improve those public services, whether that be from a health perspective, from a local and regional government perspective. But how do we as businesses come together, work more collaboratively and deliver the real benefits that devolution can bring, I guess, into the Greater Manchester region? Does that answer your question, Matt?
Well, I'm going to probe a bit further, if that's okay, on this one. As I'm going to use my Paxman effect here, because you've talked about transport as well, and this is to start with you, Marie, but I think for all the speakers here that we know that there've been challenges around transport, not just intercity but intra-city as well, and what that means. What does the Devo deal enable you to do that you couldn't do before, I suppose, in some ways? And where can tech play a role in that as well, at bridging that gap and helping make some of that difference?
Okay, so I think so if I take the first one, then I think from a business perspective, you know, the mayor's plans around transport are music to my ears, really, even from a personal perspective, as in how I make my journey into work currently. So up until recently, it was actually more cost effective for me to drive into the city than it was to get a train, which is madness, really. So I am really looking forward to that tap in, tap out version of transport that you know the mayor is bringing into Greater Manchester, where you will have an integrated system for both trains and buses so that people can make those journeys. So I think that's probably the first thing and the first difference. But I think then Devo is very much about place, isn't it? And actually, to make changes like that, you need to take a place-based approach, and actually that's where technology can make a real difference. So looking, I guess, at smart cities infrastructure coming in. So I know my colleague Linda Chandler was over at is it called UK Reef recently in Leeds, looking at the built environment, and actually how do we build smart cities technology into our environment? How do we use technology to map better the routes for buses and trains and show people the best routes to get there? So there are so many different things that we can really bring in here from a transport perspective, which also then help with one of our other key objectives, which is that sustainability side of things, and help drive that route to net zero. I think there's a place for technology there as well, looking at data sharing and how do we know that any change that we're going to execute is actually going to have the impact that we think it's going to have the impact. Well, it's going to be the data that's going to show us that. So a big question, and I could probably go on for an awful long time, Matt, but I think those are the key things I'd pull out.
And the good people of Leeds will be delighted that you give them a shout out on UK Reef there as well, Marie, on that. Joanna, I just want to bring you in because obviously, you know, digital policy here. I should say that I'm about to close the poll in a moment or two. So any last people want to put a response into the poll, please do so. But Joanna, on that smart cities point, I think we've heard a lot about smart cities, and we've heard Marie there say a bit about using data. You know, this Devo deal, again, places a big premium on transport and connecting people. How does that help you as a combined authority in terms of planning for the future on transport?
I mean, I think the opportunity around transport is huge, as Marie said, not just because of how it will enable people to move around the city, access opportunities, but actually, if we think about integrated ticketing, the data set that will create in terms of understanding how people travel, when people travel, the demand for different routes at different times will really help us have that kind of, it will be such a game-changing, significant data set. I think from a kind of policy perspective, the new refreshed digital blueprint has kind of an additional priority in it this time that wasn't there pre 2023, to really look at our smart connected places. And I think the issue for me, Matt, is, we use the word smart places, and I think it's not always clear what we mean by smart places. Maybe some of us in tech policy know what we mean. Maybe some of us have got slightly different views, but we took the very conscious decision when we refreshed the digital blueprint to call that new priority that we included in the blueprint. And I'm going to get this wrong now because we only launched it last Wednesday. Connected, sustainable places, to really be clear about what we thought a smart place was. And it is that connectivity. It's how people are connected and places are connected in a sustainable way. And one of the key things for that is to be really sort of using our data better, whether that's to understand how people move around the city so that we can get more people onto public transport, or whether that's understanding the data about our own emissions. We talked earlier about our bold ambitions for climate change and being carbon neutral by 2038 in Greater Manchester. So we really do need to get better about understanding where are those emissions coming from and how can we reduce them. So I think, when we talk about smart places, it is really understanding what is it that's going to drive sustainability and how are we going to affect that behaviour change and that wealth of data that we will have through transport and our own assets and so on is going to be so important for that.
Thanks, Joanna. And Joe, turn to you here on this. So we talked a bit about transport, smart cities. We talked a little about that digital infrastructure leadership board and that leadership role here, I think. But in terms of economic impact for the city as well and economic growth, the tech sector has a huge role already in Greater Manchester. Does this Devo deal help change and frame your conversations differently, not just with the tech sector, but with other international investors, getting them to notice Manchester?
That is a big question, Matt. So in terms of just following where we were with the conversation about transport, I think all of this helps in terms of just thinking about a competitive position for the city region. So the more we are able to say we have, a kind of best-in-class integrated transport system across the city region and connecting more widely as plans are out to 2030 with Great British Rail, the more attractive the city region becomes an investment prospect for the tech sector, but also for our other key sectors around life sciences, financial, professional, business services, advanced manufacturing. It's one of the key things people will be asking us about, and it allows us to put a point of differentiation with maybe other cities in the UK, but more importantly, actually other cities internationally, and say, look, this is what you get as part of the GM investment story. I think the piece you then complement that with is starting to talk about your specific sector strengths and say, well, look, these are the enabling factors of skills, transport or housing, or the digital blueprint, or as Joanna's touched on. But these are the specific sector strengths where you can invest and be part of. One example being obviously cyber that we've touched on, and you then start to be able to tell the story of what's happening with GCHQ. We've got Dish and the work that's happening there with Plexel in terms of growing the innovation economy around cyber. We've got the things Marie's already touched on in terms of the skills base and what the universities are doing. So you have that cluster development alongside the city region enabling factors, and I think that becomes very powerful. And the final thing, and we haven't touched on it as much in today's call, but if for those colleagues in Manchester, or for those who haven't been for a while, there's a real buzz about the city at the minute, and that really matters. There's energy in the city core, but there's also in the outer boroughs. And so, when you are having those investment conversations, there is a wider conversation about being part of that story and that future growth. And it might be that that's because someone's a University of Manchester alumni or a Manchester United or Manchester City fan or remembers the music of deindustrialised Manchester in the 80s. But that resonance matters, and being part of that energy, I think, is an important thing for the city at the moment too. And you see that happening. And for me, the tech sector is a huge part of that story, and it's bringing that energy as well. And that, I think, is also quite powerful.
I was at an event recently, Joe, where somebody talked about Manchester having that second city swagger. And my response was, don't tell Birmingham that you just said that there. So I think there's definitely something in that, though. A final question from me, and a last opportunity for any other questions, because somebody's just put this question in, was about, well, you know, we're hearing this from Microsoft's perspective, and often we see these Devo deals in terms of big business. What does this mean in terms of SMEs? So from a Microsoft perspective, interaction with SMEs, from Midas's perspective, encouraging that innovation, and GMCA's perspective in terms of supporting the SME landscape. So I want to start with Marie first on this.
Yeah, no, and that's a great question, because obviously our SMEs are really important to the Greater Manchester community and the economy. You know, we're also quite famous for growing unicorns as well. So one of the things that we're doing as Microsoft is we are working closely with those SMEs. So I've talked an awful lot about collaboration, and it is one thing that in Greater Manchester we are really, really good at. So Joe touched very briefly on Dish. So for those who don't know, so Dish is I don't know what it exactly stands for, but it's the cyber hub that has been pulled together and has been run by Barclays Eagle Labs and Plexel over in the city. They've got cyber accelerators going on at the moment, where you've got startups that are coming through. So Microsoft are going out, we're talking to those startups and looking at how we can bring our startups program into those accelerators, basically. Just for people who don't know, so Microsoft Startup Program actually gives startups access to Microsoft 365, Dynamics, and also gives them free cloud credits, which are things that startups really need as they start to come together. We've also got our skilling side of things that we bring into our SME community as well. But within that startups program, then we also have things like mentorships as well. So you can reach out through the Microsoft network in order to get some mentorship. Now, we're doing that quite closely with Dish currently, but we're looking to roll that out across all of the Greater Manchester region. So one of the things I've been doing recently is going around and talking to all of the chief execs in all of the regions that we have, talking to them about various different things around digital transformation. But one of the big topics of conversation is, how do we help your startup community? What can we bring, and how do we help your SME community to thrive and grow?
Brilliant. And for those that place a premium on accuracy, it's the Digital Security Hub. That's what Dish stands for there.
I remember that now,
Matt. Joe, just from your perspective as well, then, so, you know, helping and supporting SMEs, you know, this Devo deal isn't just about big business. It is about that innovation and innovative companies in Manchester too.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we've been doing alongside the Devolution deal, what we're starting to pull together, is a program called the Innovation Accelerator, where almost in advance of the Devolution deal, Manchester had agreed with government to do more place-based innovation. And so that's also just been announced, 10 essentially pilot projects bringing together universities around a number of different thematic areas, large companies as well as SMEs. So, you know, that's one that I definitely look at, saying it's kind of brand new, and that's an opportunity for SMEs to get involved in that kind of innovation collaboration, innovation partnership, potentially then through supply chains. Midas has done a little bit of work on this as well, and what we've been trying to do is match make between some of our larger foreign-owned companies and innovative SMEs in the digital space who are coming with a kind of Dragon's Den challenge type approach and saying, well, how can we bring some of those together? So I think there's that networking aspect. Now, we were doing that before the Devolution deal, but the new toolkit in the Devolution deal around investment zones allows us to perhaps accelerate that in the future as well. And I think the important bit I just add on that is it allows us to do it across Greater Manchester. So those innovation accelerators are located in, you know, Atton Valley in the northeast around Oldham and Rochdale. We've got opportunities in Salford. We've got further opportunities around Stockport and Trafford. So you can come into Manchester, but also into Greater Manchester as well. And that, I think, also creates further opportunities for SMEs to be part of quite a large ecosystem and a large sub-regional economy.
Thanks, Joe. I've got a final question in the chat that I'm going to place very briefly, and I want to bring Joanna in to answer it, and then go to Joe for some concluding remarks. So Joanna, the technical pathways that we talked about, the T levels, it requires collaboration for the sector and the tech sector with the entire business community. How do we go about making sure that we've got that commitment and that it actually happens? So I want to start with Joanna, but if there's other speakers who want to jump in, please feel free.
Thanks, Matt. Can I also just add one point on the previous question, which
you can jump in.
Is really important, what we're doing for SMEs. Just to flag the opportunities that kind of the fiscal devolution side of the settlement gives to us. So many people, particularly I know in Midas, are counting down the days to the end of ERDF, and the pain that ERDF funding has caused in the way that we fund business support. UK SPF will replace that, but we know at nowhere near the level that ERDF did. But still with a constrained set of kind of government outputs. What fiscal devolution through business rate retention for 10 years will allow us to do is really invest in business support that meets the needs of local businesses. So we will be able to go out to market for support that's more responsive to the SME community, as opposed to driven by ERDF targets around jobs created, which we know isn't necessarily the thing that all SMEs are looking to do. They're not all looking to scale. So I think there are some really exciting opportunities in the fiscal side of the deal for SMEs, and it is very much a kind of, we need to work with SMEs in that space to ensure that as we go out to market with a lot more flexibility, we're doing that to meet your needs. So apologies for that digression, but I just think it was important to kind of pop that in. In terms of technical pathways and collaboration, how do we make sure we get the right people around the table? I mean, I'd like to think, though I'd love people to call me out if I'm wrong, that we do have really great relationships with our industry partners, you know, in the work and skills team that are leading on the education part of the deal. We've had the Bridge team, which and now the careers team, which have been building that industry relationship for many years to look at how we collaborate and support businesses with their skills needs. We've obviously got Midas and their account management functions. We've got big tech companies with their partner networks that we're working with. We've got great relationships with the Chamber, who've led on the recent LSIP, the Local Skills Intelligence Plan. Improvement plan, I'm not sure what the I is, and also Manchester Digital. So I think we've got a lot of forums through which we connect with our sector. And I think what we've also got now is something really tangible to work with. And so I think that ongoing collaboration on policy development is there, but now we've got some real markers in the sand, and we can use the forums that we've got to really design how we deliver that next stage of DGFO through the collaboration pathways. And anyone who heard the Mayor speak last Wednesday, and I've mentioned it before, that was very much his call at the end of that was, you know, he wants to hear from industry through those forums and those routes in that people have got, how this needs to look for them. How can we design the technical education pathway to meet industry needs? So I think, you know, my final call out will be to anyone in this call who doesn't feel that they're linked into any of those kind of forums I've mentioned to reach out so that we can ensure that we're getting your input into this process as we go forward.
I think that's a great call, and I'm certain that people will want to get in touch on that, Joanna, definitely. I'm very mindful of time here as well. So Joe, we could talk devolution all day, but I want to come to you, please, for some sort of concluding remarks on this and what happens next.
Yeah, worryingly, Matt, I think we could, but we might lose everyone else on the call. So I think Joanna's left that in a really great place. You know, it's please contact us. I know the poll there's you know interest in perhaps a follow-up session to this. Greater Manchester has been at devolution for a long time, but this is the beginning of the next stage, and I think this next stage is very exciting. I think it's exciting because we've got more power of the city region over our destiny, but it also comes at a time at which, for this sector, the tech industry really is starting to boom in Greater Manchester, and the wider city region, I think, is a very exciting place to be at the moment. So, you know, come and speak to us if you want to work in partnership, and equally if you know want to have those conversations about working with us for the long term. And yeah, thank you to you, Matt, as well, and Tech UK for facilitating this session. You know, it's been really enjoyable, and as I said, hopefully the beginning of the conversation.
Joe, thank you very much, and please, you know, we want to have that conversation. Tech UK, we want to be making sure we're supporting devolution deals and how we engage with and encourage a thriving tech sector across the entire UK. I think the ambition set out from Greater Manchester is a brilliant one. So a massive thank you to Joe Manning, Marie Hamilton, and Joanna Manelli from Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Microsoft and Midas respectively. Please do get in touch. We've recorded this session and we'll be sharing it as well. And thank you very much. Have a great day.